Maybe we should ask the janitor, Derek sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. I'm sure he knows all about advanced robotics. The words cut through the tension-filled air of Neotech Industries like a blade, drawing uncomfortable silence from the 200 employees gathered around the wreckage. CEO Derek Williams stood amid the scattered remains of a $50 million prototype engine, its titanium components spread across the Boston factory floor like the shattered pieces of his company's future. Sparks still danced from severed electrical connections, the acrid smell of burning circuitry mixing with the cold sweat of desperation. In less than a week, this revolutionary robotics engine was supposed to carry the company's initial public offering to unprecedented heights. Instead, it had just spectacularly failed in front of the most important investors in the industry. Board members whispered behind cupped hands while news crews gathered like vultures outside the building's glass walls. But Derek's cruel joke was about to backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. The quiet black man in maintenance coveralls he'd just mocked was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. 3 days earlier, Neotech Industries had been riding the wave of Silicon Valley success stories. The company's revolutionary AI-integrated propulsion system promised to transform everything from manufacturing robotics to aerospace applications. Tech blogs called it the iPhone moment for mechanical engineering. Investment firms lined up with checkbooks ready, eager to get in on what industry insiders whispered could be the largest robotics IPO in history. Derek Williams, at 38, had built his reputation on aggressive expansion and flashy presentations. His corner office overlooked Boston Harbor, its walls lined with awards and magazine covers featuring his confident smile. "Disruption through innovation," read the bronze plaque on his mahogany desk, a motto he'd repeated in countless interviews and keynote speeches. To Derek, success meant being the loudest voice in the room, the guy who took credit when things went right and found scapegoats when they didn't. The engine that now lay in pieces had been Derek's crown jewel, a fusion of cutting-edge AI algorithms and precision mechanical engineering that could adapt to any industrial application in real time. Pre-orders had already reached $800 million. The IPO, scheduled for the following Monday, was projected to value the company at $12 billion. Derek's personal stake would net him over $400 million, enough to join the ranks of tech billionaires he'd always envied. But mechanical perfection, as any real engineer knows, doesn't bend to marketing timelines or investor expectations. The first sign of trouble had appeared during routine stress testing on Monday morning. The engine's cooling system showed minor fluctuations, nothing that couldn't be tweaked, the lead engineer assured Derek. By Tuesday afternoon, those fluctuations had become violent oscillations. By Wednesday evening, with investors already flying in from around the world, the prototype had suffered what engineers delicately called catastrophic system failure. Marcus Williams, no relation to the CEO, though the shared surname had led to more than one awkward mix-up over the years, had been quietly observing the crisis unfold from his unique vantage point. At 52, he'd worked the third shift at Neotech for 8 years, arriving each night at 11 p.m. to clean offices, empty trash, and maintain the spotless image that impressed visiting investors. His maintenance coveralls bore his first name stitched in simple blue thread, a sharp contrast to the embroidered executive shirts and designer suits that surrounded him each day. Marcus had learned long ago to make himself invisible in corporate environments. He moved through the building like a ghost, mopping floors while executives argued in conference rooms, wiping down whiteboards covered with equations he understood better than most of the people writing them. His suggestions, offered quietly and respectfully over the years, had been met with polite smiles and prompt dismissal. "Thanks, Marcus, but we've got it handled," was the standard response, usually delivered without making eye contact. Yet Marcus noticed things others missed. He'd observed the engineering team's mounting frustration, heard the increasingly heated late-night discussions, watched as confidence gave way to panic. During his rounds, he'd studied the engine's blueprints left carelessly on desks, noting design choices that made him quietly shake his head. His trained eye caught details that expensive diagnostic equipment somehow overlooked. the subtle vibrations in specific components, the inconsistent thermal patterns, the stress points that would inevitably fail under pressure. The morning of the demonstration, Marcus had arrived early to prepare the factory floor for the biggest day in Neotech's history. 200 employees, 37 investors, 12 board members, and a handful of tech journalists filled the space normally occupied by development workstations. Derek had spared no expense on the presentation. Professional lighting, a state-of-the-art sound system, and catered breakfast from Boston's most exclusive restaurant. The engine sat center stage on a custom-built platform, its polished titanium surface gleaming under the carefully positioned spotlights. Every component had been precision-machined to tolerances measured in microns. The AI integration modules hummed with processing power that rivaled supercomputers. On paper, in simulations, and in carefully controlled tests, the system was flawless. But machines, Marcus knew from hard experience, had their own language, and this one had been screaming warnings that no one was listening to. The demonstration began flawlessly. Derek's presentation was polished, confident, and peppered with just enough technical jargon to sound authoritative without losing his audience. The engine started smoothly, its initial operations drawing appreciative nods from investors. For the first 15 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as rehearsed. Then came the stress test. As the engine's workload increased, subtle vibrations began to ripple through the mounting platform. The lead engineer, Dr. Sarah Monroe, frowned at her diagnostic tablet, her confidence wavering as readings began to drift outside normal parameters. The oscillations grew stronger, causing champagne glasses on nearby tables to develop concentric ripples like scenes from Jurassic Park. "Minor calibration issue," Derek announced with forced calm, his media training kicking in automatically. "Our team will have this optimized momentarily." But moments stretched into minutes as engineers huddled around their instruments, their whispered consultations growing more urgent. The vibrations intensified, and somewhere deep in the engine's core, metal began to sing with the high-pitched whine that every mechanical engineer learns to fear. Marcus, stationed discreetly near the emergency exits as per safety protocol, felt his stomach clench. He'd heard that sound before, in submarine engine rooms where such failures meant everyone aboard would never see the surface again. His hands instinctively moved toward the emergency shutoff controls, but he caught himself. Who was he to override the experts? The failure, when it came, was both spectacular and inevitable. A cascade of system errors triggered simultaneous malfunctions across multiple subsystems. The AI integration modules, unable to compensate for mechanical failures they weren't programmed to recognize, began issuing contradictory commands. Cooling pumps seized. Pressure valves stuck open. Temperature sensors reported impossible readings that sent the automated systems into protective shutdown loops. The engine tore itself apart in less than 30 seconds, its $50 million worth of precision components transformed into expensive scrap metal. Emergency systems filled the air with the harsh wail of alarms, while automated fire suppression systems created a fog of chemical suppressant that left everyone coughing and disoriented. In the aftermath, as investors streamed toward the exits and journalists frantically typed breaking news alerts, Derek stood frozen in the center of the disaster. His IPO dreams evaporated with each departing investor. His company's stock price, already volatile due to market speculation, began its inevitable freefall in real-time trading. The engineering team, exhausted from 72 hours of desperate troubleshooting, stared at their instruments in defeated bewilderment. They'd run every diagnostic protocol, analyzed every component, consulted with industry experts, and applied every theoretical solution in their considerable arsenal. The engine remained as broken as before, its core problems hidden behind layers of complexity that seemed to defy conventional engineering wisdom. Derek's eyes swept the assembled crowd, searching for someone, anyone, to blame for the catastrophe that had just destroyed his carefully constructed empire. His gaze fell on Marcus, still standing quietly near his maintenance station, observing the chaos with the calm detachment of someone who'd seen this coming from the beginning. That's when Derek spoke the words that would change everything. Maybe we should ask the janitor. I'm sure he knows all about advanced robotics. The cruel sarcasm in his voice was unmistakable, designed to deflect blame and restore his wounded ego by putting someone else in their place. The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the ugly desperation behind the comment. But something unexpected happened next. Instead of looking away in embarrassment or retreating to safer ground, Marcus stepped forward. "Actually," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the post-disaster tension with surprising authority, "I might have some ideas." The words hung in the air like a challenge, transforming Derek's desperate joke into something far more dangerous. A test that could expose just how little the CEO really knew about the technology his company claimed to master. And Marcus was about to show everyone exactly what 8 years of invisible expertise looked like when it finally found its voice. 23 years earlier, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Williams had stood in the engine room of the USS Virginia, a nuclear submarine cutting through the dark waters of the North Atlantic. The vessel's S-9G reactor hummed with controlled atomic power, driving propulsion systems so advanced they remained classified decades later. At 29, Marcus was the youngest senior mechanic ever to earn clearance for the Navy's most sensitive propulsion projects, a distinction that came with immense responsibility and absolute secrecy. "Every machine has a voice," Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez had told him during his first week aboard the Virginia. "You just have to listen close enough to hear what it's trying to tell you." The words became Marcus's guiding principle, a philosophy that would serve him through 12 years of military service across 3 different submarine classes. In the depths of the ocean, there was no margin for error. When you're operating 800 feet below the surface, surrounded by crushing pressure that could implode a hull in milliseconds, mechanical failure didn't just mean mission failure. It meant death for everyone aboard. Marcus learned to diagnose problems by feel, by sound, by the subtle vibrations that traveled through steel hulls like whispers from the machine's soul. His hands, now weathered by decades of work, had once performed surgery on reactor cooling systems, while the submarine maintained radio silence during classified operations. He'd rebuilt propulsion assemblies in cramped quarters with tools that cost more than most people's cars, working by feel in spaces so tight that conventional diagnostic equipment couldn't fit. The Navy had trained him to think 3 steps ahead of any potential failure, to understand not just how machines worked, but why they failed and how to prevent those failures before they became catastrophic. Marcus's specialty was integration systems, the complex interfaces where mechanical engineering met cutting-edge electronics. Submarine propulsion required seamless coordination between nuclear reactors, electric motors, computer-controlled navigation systems, and mechanical drive trains. One miscommunication between systems could leave a submarine dead in the water, vulnerable to enemies or environmental hazards that showed no mercy to the unprepared. But military service, especially in classified roles, came with risks that extended far beyond mechanical failures. In 2010, during his final tour of duty, Marcus had discovered a critical flaw in a new propulsion control system scheduled for fleet-wide deployment. The problem was subtle, a timing mismatch between the computer controls and mechanical responses that would cause catastrophic failures under specific stress conditions. His detailed report, filed through proper channels, should have triggered an immediate investigation and system recall. Instead, it triggered a nightmare that would destroy his career and derail his life for over a decade. Someone in the chain of command, Marcus never learned who, decided that admitting the flaw would be too expensive and politically damaging. Rather than address the engineering problem, they chose to discredit the messenger. Marcus found himself under investigation for allegedly falsifying maintenance records, accused of creating problems to make himself look indispensable. The charges were eventually dropped when independent testing confirmed his findings, but the damage to his career was irreversible. His security clearance was suspended pending review, a review that stretched on for years while bureaucratic machinery ground slowly forward. Without clearance, he couldn't work on the classified systems where his expertise was most valuable. The defense contractors who might have hired him couldn't risk associating with someone under investigation, regardless of his track record or the eventual vindication. By the time Marcus's name was officially cleared, he'd been out of the industry for so long that his credentials seemed stale to potential employers. Hiring managers saw gaps in his resume and moved on to candidates with uninterrupted career trajectories. The technical revolution in robotics and AI integration, fields where his submarine experience would have been invaluable, had passed him by while he fought legal battles he should never have had to face. Marcus took the janitorial position at Neotech, not from lack of ambition, but from necessity. His mother, Dorothy Williams, had developed complications from diabetes that required expensive treatments not fully covered by Medicare. The medical bills mounted faster than Marcus could pay them, and steady employment with health benefits became more important than professional pride. But Marcus never stopped learning. His lunch bag, worn leather softened by years of use, contained technical manuals instead of magazines. During his breaks, he studied the latest developments in AI integration, robotics control systems, and advanced materials science. The engineering principles he'd learned in the Navy weren't obsolete. They were foundational truths that applied regardless of whether you were working on submarine propulsion or industrial robotics. Every night, as he moved through Neotech's offices with quiet efficiency, Marcus observed the engineers struggling with problems he recognized from his military experience. He watched them apply brute force computational solutions to mechanical issues that required intuitive understanding. He saw them miss fundamental integration problems while focusing on sophisticated software fixes. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same advanced propulsion principles he'd mastered in classified military applications were being reinvented, badly, by civilian engineers who lacked his hard-won perspective. But Marcus had learned the cost of speaking up without invitation. He kept his observations to himself, collected his modest paycheck, and took quiet satisfaction in keeping the building clean for people who saw him as furniture. Until today, when Derek's desperation created an opening that 8 years of careful patience had prepared Marcus to fill. The machine was calling to him again, just like Chief Rodriguez had taught him all those years ago. This time, Marcus was finally ready to answer. The uncomfortable silence that followed Marcus's quiet offer stretched across the factory floor like a held breath. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the maintenance worker who had just volunteered to solve a problem that had stumped 12 of the industry's top engineers working around the clock for 3 consecutive days. Derek's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching panic as he realized his sarcastic comment had been taken seriously. The investors who remained, about half had already fled toward the exits, shifted uncomfortably in their expensive suits, uncertain whether they were witnessing corporate desperation or the opening act of an even bigger disaster. Dr. Sarah Monroe, the lead engineer whose team had designed the failed system, stared at Marcus with a mixture of professional curiosity and protective instinct. She'd worked 18-hour days for the past month, sacrificing sleep and sanity to perfect every component of the engine. The idea that someone outside her carefully selected team might succeed where they had failed felt like both an insult and an impossible hope. "I'm sorry," Derek said, his voice tight with barely controlled hysteria. "But this is a $50 million piece of precision engineering, not a broken coffee machine. We don't need—" "Actually," interrupted a voice from the crowd, crisp with authority and decades of industry respect, "I'd like to hear what he has to say." Every head turned toward the speaker, and the remaining tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had arrived unannounced, her presence commanding immediate attention from everyone present. At 67, she was a living legend in mechanical engineering, the architect of propulsion systems that had powered everything from Mars rovers to next-generation aircraft carriers. Her endorsement could make careers. Her criticism could end them. "Dr. Rodriguez," Derek stammered, suddenly looking like a child caught breaking expensive toys. "I wasn't expecting—" We didn't know you were coming. The board asked me to observe today's demonstration, she said coolly, her sharp brown eyes taking in the wreckage with the analytical precision of someone who'd seen plenty of engineering failures in her distinguished career. Given the circumstances, I think it might be instructive to hear alternative perspectives. Her gaze settled on Marcus with frank assessment. You said you have ideas about this system. What makes you think you understand something that our engineering team has missed? The question wasn't hostile, but it carried the weight of someone who'd built her reputation on cutting through corporate politics to focus on technical truth. Marcus felt the familiar calm settle over him, the same clarity he'd experienced in submarine engine rooms when crisis demanded absolute focus. Ma'am, he said respectfully, I've been observing this engine's development for 8 months during my maintenance rounds. I've seen the design evolution, heard the team discussions, watched the testing protocols. With respect to everyone's hard work, I think the problem isn't in the individual components, it's in how they're talking to each other. Dr. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Integration issues? Yes, ma'am. Specifically, harmonic resonance between the cooling system and the AI control modules. The mechanical components are operating exactly as designed, but the electronic systems are trying to compensate for variations they interpret as problems instead of normal operational characteristics. The engineering team exchanged glances. Marcus had just described, in precise technical language, the exact theory they'd been discussing in their most recent crisis meetings. How could a janitor know terminology that some graduate-level engineers struggled with? Derek, sensing an opportunity to regain control of the situation, stepped forward with renewed confidence. This is ridiculous. We can't risk further damage to critical equipment based on— Mr. Williams, Dr. Rodriguez interrupted, her tone suggesting that Derek's opinion carried significantly less weight than he imagined. Your demonstration has already failed spectacularly in front of your investors. What exactly do you have left to lose? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Derek's face flushed as he realized the truth of her assessment. His IPO was dead. His investors were fleeing. His company's reputation lay in ruins alongside the destroyed engine. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. But Derek Williams hadn't built a multi-million-dollar company by backing down from challenges, even when they terrified him. His survival instincts, honed by years of corporate warfare, recognized an opportunity to turn disaster into dramatic comeback, if he played it right. Fine, he announced, his voice carrying across the factory floor with renewed authority. If you're so confident, prove it. You have 1 hour to demonstrate whatever solution you think you've discovered. The crowd stirred with murmurs of anticipation and disbelief. This was either about to become the most remarkable corporate turnaround in recent memory, or a public humiliation that would be discussed in business schools for decades. Derek stepped closer to Marcus, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the suddenly quiet space. But let's make this interesting. If you succeed, if you actually manage to fix what our expert team couldn't, I'll personally recommend you for the position of head of engineering. Gasps echoed across the factory floor. The head of engineering position at Neotech commanded a salary approaching $200,000, plus equity that could be worth millions if the company ever recovered from today's disaster. And if I fail? Marcus asked quietly. Derek's smile held no warmth. Then everyone here will know exactly who understands this technology and who's just pretending they do, and Rodriguez stepped forward, her presence adding gravitas to what had started as Derek's desperate gamble. I'll serve as an independent observer to verify any results, she announced. If this gentleman can demonstrate a viable solution, his findings will be properly documented and credited. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the full weight of what he was accepting. Success would vindicate 8 years of patient observation and unlock opportunities he'd thought were lost forever. Failure would confirm every stereotype that had kept him invisible for nearly a decade. But as he looked at the scattered components of the broken engine, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his Navy days, the quiet confidence that came from truly understanding the machine's voice. The engine wasn't randomly broken. It was crying out with specific problems that had specific solutions. "I accept," he said simply. The crowd formed a loose circle around the wreckage, creating an impromptu arena where Marcus would either prove his worth or confirm his place as an overconfident janitor who'd reached too far above his station. Smartphone cameras appeared as employees began recording what would either be a triumph or a disaster worth sharing. Derek checked his expensive watch with theatrical precision. 1 hour starting now. Marcus Williams rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked by decades of precise work, and stepped toward the machine that would determine the rest of his life. Somewhere in the crowd, Dr. Rodriguez watched with the intense focus of someone who recognized that she was about to witness something extraordinary, one way or another. The clock was ticking, and Marcus was finally ready to let his expertise speak louder than his uniform. Marcus approached the destroyed engine with the methodical calm of someone who'd learned to work under pressure where mistakes meant death. While the engineering team had spent 3 days attacking the problem with sophisticated diagnostic equipment worth more than most people's houses, Marcus reached into his maintenance cart and pulled out a simple toolkit that had cost him less than $50 at a hardware store. The crowd watched in fascination and growing skepticism as he selected a basic digital multimeter, a mechanical stethoscope, and a small LED flashlight. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, her engineering mind intrigued by the contrast between Marcus's humble tools and the million-dollar diagnostic arrays scattered around the factory floor. "Before you try to fix something," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the expectant silence, "you have to understand what it's actually trying to tell you." Discovery 1. The false signal. 8 minutes elapsed. Marcus knelt beside the engine's central processing unit, placing his weathered hands on the titanium housing with the gentle precision of a doctor taking a patient's pulse. The crowd murmured restlessly. They'd expected dramatic action, not what looked like mechanical meditation. "The diagnostic computers are reading temperature fluctuations in the cooling system," Marcus said, his eyes closed as he felt vibrations invisible to sophisticated sensors. "But computers can lie if they're asking the wrong questions." He moved his hands slowly along the cooling manifold, pausing at specific junction points where pipes merged and separated. The engineering team had spent hours analyzing data from digital sensors embedded throughout the system, but Marcus was using a diagnostic method older than computers, direct mechanical intuition developed through decades of working with high-precision systems. "Here," he said, tapping a specific section of the cooling loop with one finger. "The temperature sensor is reading fluctuations, but they're not coming from cooling problems. They're coming from harmonic vibrations that are making the sensor think there's a thermal issue." Dr. Monroe stepped closer, her professional curiosity overriding her skepticism. "The sensors are military-grade precision instruments. They don't generate false readings from minor vibrations." Marcus looked up at her with respect but unwavering confidence. "Ma'am, with all due respect, these sensors are designed for stationary installations. This engine is designed to be mobile, which means it operates under different vibrational stresses than the sensors were calibrated for." He pulled out his mechanical stethoscope, a simple device that looked almost primitive compared to the electronic monitoring equipment surrounding them, and placed it against the cooling manifold. "Listen." Dr. Monroe accepted the stethoscope, her expression skeptical until the earpieces revealed what her expensive instruments had missed. Her eyes widened as she heard the subtle rhythmic pulsing that Marcus had detected through touch alone. "There's a resonance frequency," she whispered, her voice carrying new respect. "It's creating micro-vibrations that are throwing off the thermal sensors." Marcus nodded. "The AI control system is trying to compensate for what it thinks are cooling problems, but it's actually creating mechanical stress by overcorrecting for sensor errors." The crowd began to murmur with growing interest. In less than 10 minutes, using tools that cost less than a fancy dinner, Marcus had identified a critical flaw that had escaped detection by some of the most sophisticated diagnostic equipment in the industry. Discovery 2. The hidden fracture. 23 minutes elapsed. With the false thermal readings explained, Marcus turned his attention to the engine's structural components. The violent failure had scattered pieces across the factory floor, but Marcus moved among them with the systematic approach of an accident investigator reconstructing a crash. The cooling problem was a symptom, he said, picking up a section of the engine's outer casing that had split along what appeared to be a random stress line. But symptoms always have causes. He held the fractured component up to the overhead lights, angling it so that his LED flashlight could illuminate the break from behind. Dr. Monroe, could you bring one of those magnifying devices over here? Dr. Monroe fetched a high-powered magnifying glass from the engineering station, watching as Marcus examined the fracture with the focused intensity of a detective studying evidence. The crowd pressed closer, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity about what the maintenance worker might discover. Manufacturing defect, Marcus announced after several minutes of careful examination. Look at this fracture pattern. It's not random stress failure. It's following a line of micro-cracks that were present before the engine ever ran. He traced the fracture line with his finger, showing how it followed a specific pattern through the titanium alloy. This component was heat-treated incorrectly during manufacturing. The temperature gradient during cooling created internal stress concentrations that made the whole assembly vulnerable to harmonic failure. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, accepting the magnifying glass to examine Marcus's findings herself. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she confirmed what he'd discovered. These microfractures would be virtually invisible during standard quality control inspections, she said slowly. They'd only become apparent under specific stress conditions. Like the resonance vibrations from the cooling system sensor errors, Marcus added. The AI kept trying to compensate for problems it thought it detected, creating exactly the stress patterns needed to propagate these hidden cracks. Dr. Monroe stared at the component in shocked recognition. We quality tested every piece of this engine. How did we miss fractures this extensive? Marcus's answer was gentle but devastating in its implications. Because your testing protocols were designed for perfect components under ideal conditions. But manufacturing isn't perfect, and real-world operations aren't ideal. The engineering team exchanged glances that carried a mixture of professional embarrassment and grudging admiration. Marcus had just demonstrated that their sophisticated quality control processes had a blind spot large enough to hide a critical structural flaw. Discovery 3. The elegant solution. 41 minutes elapsed. With 19 minutes remaining on Derek's arbitrary deadline, Marcus had identified both the immediate cause of the engine's failure and the underlying manufacturing defect that made it inevitable. But diagnosis, as every real engineer knows, is only half the battle. The other half is finding a solution that actually works. The good news, Marcus said, studying the scattered components with the calculating gaze of someone solving a three-dimensional puzzle, is that we don't need to rebuild the engine from scratch. We just need to change how the components talk to each other. He moved to the engine's control interface, a sophisticated computer terminal that managed the integration between mechanical systems and AI algorithms. The engineering team had spent countless hours tweaking software parameters, trying to optimize performance through computational solutions. The problem isn't in the software, Marcus explained as he accessed diagnostic menus with surprising familiarity. The algorithms are actually working exactly as designed. The problem is that we're giving them the wrong information to work with. His fingers moved across the interface with the confidence of someone who understood the underlying principles rather than just the operational procedures. Instead of trying to eliminate the harmonic resonances, we need to account for them in the baseline calibration. Dr. Rodriguez watched intently as Marcus navigated through layers of system configuration that most engineers would need manuals to understand. You're proposing to retune the entire sensor array? Not retune, Marcus corrected. Recalibrate. The sensors are measuring exactly what they're supposed to measure. We just need to teach the AI to interpret those measurements in the context of mobile operation instead of stationary testing. He pulled up a configuration screen that displayed the engine's operational parameters in real time. Even in its broken state, the system continued to generate data streams that revealed the patterns Marcus had diagnosed. Look at these baseline readings, he said, pointing to specific data points that fluctuated in regular patterns. The AI interprets these variations as problems because it's comparing them to ideal laboratory conditions. But these aren't problems. They're the normal operational signature of a mobile system. Working with practiced efficiency, Marcus began adjusting calibration parameters that redefine the AI's understanding of normal operation. Instead of trying to eliminate the harmonic resonances, he was teaching the system to expect them and compensate accordingly. The mechanical components don't need to be rebuilt, he explained as he worked. They need to be allowed to operate within their natural stress patterns instead of fighting against them. With 7 minutes remaining on the deadline, Marcus initiated a modified startup sequence that incorporated his recalibrated parameters. The crowd held its collective breath as the engine's diagnostic systems came online, processing information through algorithms that now understood the difference between operational characteristics and actual problems. Temperature readings stabilized within normal ranges. Pressure sensors reported consistent values. Most importantly, the harmonic resonances that had previously triggered cascade failures were now recognized as normal operational signatures rather than system errors. The engine wasn't just running. It was running better than it ever had during testing, its performance optimized for real-world conditions instead of laboratory perfection. Marcus stepped back from the control interface and checked Derek's expensive watch. 47 minutes. He said quietly. The factory floor erupted in spontaneous applause that began with Dr. Rodriguez and spread through the crowd like wildfire. But Marcus remained focused on the engine, listening to its voice with the satisfaction of someone who'd finally been allowed to speak its language. The applause died away, as everyone realized that running diagnostics was only half the test. The real moment of truth would come when the engine had to perform under the same stress conditions that had caused its spectacular failure just hours earlier. Derek stood frozen near the control panel, his face a mask of conflicted emotions as he watched his company's salvation potentially unfold at the hands of someone he'd spent years dismissing. Computer diagnostics are one thing, Dr. Monroe said carefully, her engineer's caution warring with growing hope. But we need to see full operational testing under load conditions. Marcus nodded with quiet confidence. The engine needs to prove it can handle real-world stress, not just laboratory conditions. He gestured toward the sophisticated testing apparatus that surrounded the rebuilt system. Dr. Rodriguez, would you do the honors? The legendary engineer stepped forward to the master control station, her weathered hands moving across familiar interfaces with decades of practiced precision. We'll run the same stress progression that caused the original failure, she announced to the gathered crowd. If Mr. Williams' solution is correct, the engine should not only survive the test, it should perform better than the original specifications. The crowd pressed closer, forming a tight semicircle around the testing area. Smartphone cameras captured every angle as employees, investors, and journalists documented what could either be Neotech's resurrection or its final humiliation. The air thrummed with nervous energy as Dr. Rodriguez initiated the startup sequence that would either vindicate Marcus's expertise or confirm Derek's worst fears. The engine came to life with a deep, thrumming purr that resonated through the factory floor's concrete foundation. Unlike the harsh, straining sounds that had preceded the original failure, this startup was smooth, controlled, and somehow confident. The titanium components gleamed under the overhead lights as internal systems synchronized with the fluid precision of a master conductor leading a world-class orchestra. Phase 1, baseline operation, Dr. Rodriguez announced, her voice carrying clearly over the engine's steady hum. Digital displays throughout the testing area showed green indicators as every system reported optimal performance. Temperature readings held steady within narrow tolerances. Pressure levels remained rock solid. Most importantly, the harmonic resonances that had previously triggered system-wide panic were now generating barely perceptible fluctuations in the monitoring equipment. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, listening to the engine's voice with the intense focus of someone whose reputation depended on what the machine was about to tell him. The crowd watched his face for any sign of concern, but his expression remained calm, almost meditative, as he processed auditory information that sophisticated sensors struggled to capture. Phase 2. Moderate stress loading, Dr. Rodriguez continued, gradually increasing the engine's workload toward the levels that had caused problems during the original demonstration. The sound deepened, gaining a controlled power that spoke of systems working in harmony rather than fighting against each other. Derek's face had gone pale as he watched performance metrics that exceeded every benchmark his engineering team had achieved during months of testing. The engine wasn't just surviving the stress test, it was thriving, operating with efficiency levels that made the original specifications look conservative. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Monroe, staring at her diagnostic tablet in disbelief. "These performance numbers are 20% higher than our best laboratory results." "Not impossible," Marcus said quietly, his eyes still closed as he listened to the machine's steady voice. "Just properly calibrated for real conditions instead of perfect ones." Dr. Rodriguez's voice carried new excitement as she announced the final phase. "Maximum stress test. The exact conditions that caused catastrophic failure this morning." The crowd held its collective breath as the engine's workload increased to levels that had previously triggered system-wide collapse. But instead of the increasingly strained sounds that had preceded the morning's disaster, the engine responded with smooth, controlled power that spoke of systems designed to work together rather than against each other. Temperature readings remained stable. Pressure sensors reported consistent values. The harmonic resonances that had previously cascaded into destructive oscillations were now absorbed and managed by AI algorithms that understood the difference between operational characteristics and actual problems. The digital chronometer on Dr. Rodriguez's control panel ticked past the 5-minute mark, the exact point where the original engine had begun its death spiral. 6 minutes. 7. 8. The engine continued to perform flawlessly, its voice steady and confident as it handled stress loads that would have destroyed the original configuration. At the 10-minute mark, Dr. Rodriguez initiated emergency shutdown procedures, not because of system failure, but because the test had achieved everything it needed to prove. The engine wound down with the controlled precision of a perfectly tuned instrument, its components cooling in the satisfied silence of a job well done. The factory floor remained dead quiet for several heartbeats as the magnitude of what they'd witnessed settled into everyone's consciousness. Then Dr. Rodriguez began to clap, a slow, measured applause that acknowledged not just technical success, but the recognition of true expertise finally given its proper stage. The rest of the crowd joined in with an ovation that shook the building's steel framework, but Marcus barely heard it. He was still listening to the engine's voice as it settled into rest, confirming what he'd known from the beginning. Every machine had something to say, if you just learned how to listen. As the applause finally died down, Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward with the deliberate authority of someone whose words carried the weight of institutional respect. Her sharp eyes moved from the perfectly functioning engine to Marcus, who stood quietly beside his maintenance cart, seemingly unaware that he'd just performed what amounted to an engineering miracle in front of 200 witnesses. "Marcus," she said, her voice cutting through the post-triumph buzz with crystalline clarity, "I've been in this industry for 30 years. I've seen brilliant engineers, innovative thinkers, and technical prodigies. What you just demonstrated isn't just skill. It's wisdom." Derek Williams stood frozen near the control panels, his expensive suit somehow making him look smaller rather than more authoritative as he watched his company's salvation unfold through the expertise of someone he'd spent 8 years treating as invisible. The promise he'd made in desperate bravado was about to become a binding obligation witnessed by everyone who mattered in his professional world. "The board of directors," Dr. Rodriguez continued, "has authorized me to offer you the position of senior systems engineer, effective immediately." She paused, letting the significance of the title sink in. "Starting salary, $180,000 annually, plus equity participation that reflects your contribution to this company's future." Murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd. The position represented not just financial security, but professional vindication that 8 years of patience and quiet observation had finally earned recognition. Marcus accepted the life-changing offer with characteristic humility. "Dr. Rodriguez, I'm honored by your confidence. I accept with one request." "Name it." "The maintenance staff who've worked alongside me, they've always treated me with respect and dignity. I'd like them to receive the recognition and advancement opportunities they deserve." Dr. Rodriguez smiled with genuine warmth. "Consider it done. Excellence recognizes excellence, regardless of job titles." The handshake that followed lasted only seconds, but it transformed Marcus Williams from an invisible janitor into the senior engineer who'd just saved Neotech Industries from bankruptcy. Around them, employees who'd witnessed the transformation began to understand that talent had been walking among them unrecognized for 8 years, waiting for someone to finally listen to what it had to say. Derek Williams forced a smile that looked more like a grimace as he realized that the man he'd mocked had just become one of his most valuable employees, and potentially his biggest threat. The board meeting that followed 3 days later was unlike anything in Neotech's corporate history. Dr. Rodriguez had compiled a comprehensive report documenting not just Marcus's technical breakthrough, but the systematic failures in corporate culture that had kept such expertise hidden for 8 years. The 12-member board sat in uncomfortable silence as she presented findings that went far beyond a single engineering triumph. The engine failure, Dr. Rodriguez explained to the assembled directors, was symptomatic of broader organizational problems that could have been prevented if employee input had been properly valued, regardless of job titles or departmental hierarchies. Her presentation included documentation of 17 separate occasions over the past 3 years when Marcus had submitted maintenance observations through proper channels. Observations that, if acted upon, would have prevented costly equipment failures and production delays. Each incident represented not just missed opportunities for improvement, but clear evidence of a corporate culture that systematically ignored valuable input based on its source rather than its merit. Derek sat at the head of the conference table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. The successful engine demonstration had saved the IPO, but the investigation it triggered was revealing management failures that ran deeper than anyone had suspected. Furthermore, Dr. Rodriguez continued, "Our review of HR records shows a pattern of dismissed complaints and ignored suggestions that suggests this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a systemic failure of leadership." The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Security footage from the factory floor showed the exact moment Derek had made his disparaging comment about asking the janitor, a moment now viewed by millions after someone leaked it to social media with the hashtag #HadJusticeForMarcus. The video had gone viral, turning Derek into an unwitting symbol of corporate arrogance and Marcus into an inspirational figure representing undervalued talent everywhere. "The board has reached a unanimous decision," announced Chairman Patricia Voss, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "Derek Williams will be transitioning to an advisory role, effective immediately." The corporate euphemism masked a devastating reality. Derek's removal from operational authority meant the loss of his $400,000 salary, his stock options, and his IPO bonus worth $15 million. His corner office would be reassigned, his decision-making power eliminated, and his professional reputation permanently tarnished by the viral video that had made him a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating people. But the board's response went beyond individual accountability. Dr. Rodriguez had been appointed as interim chief technology officer, with Marcus as her deputy and heir apparent. New policies mandated that all employee suggestions receive formal review regardless of their source, with documented responses required within 30 days. The maintenance staff Marcus had advocated for received immediate promotions and salary increases that reflected their actual contributions rather than their job classifications. Derek's public apology, delivered to the entire company via video conference, was a masterclass in forced humility. I failed to recognize the expertise and value that Marcus Williams brought to our organization, he admitted, his words carefully crafted by legal advisors who understood the liability implications of his previous behavior. My prejudice and arrogance nearly cost this company everything, and I take full responsibility for that failure of leadership. The apology felt hollow to most employees, who recognized it as damage control rather than genuine remorse. But Marcus, characteristically, accepted it with grace that made Derek's contrition look even more inadequate by comparison. 6 months later, Derek's advisory role had become largely ceremonial, a comfortable exile where he could collect a reduced salary while watching others implement the visionary leadership the company actually needed. He attended meetings where his opinions carried little weight, observed decisions being made by people who actually understood the technology they were developing, and learned the humbling lesson that expertise couldn't be faked or delegated. Marcus, meanwhile, had transformed not just his own life, but the entire culture of neo-tech industries. His mentorship program had helped 53 underrepresented employees advance into positions that reflected their actual capabilities. The company's innovation rate had increased by 300%, as previously ignored suggestions finally received the attention they deserved. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about revenge. It was about creating systems where talent could flourish regardless of where it came from. 18 months later, Marcus Williams sat in his corner office, the same one Derek had once occupied, reviewing blueprints for Neotech's next-generation propulsion system. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the factory floor where his transformation had begun, now bustling with diverse teams whose ideas were valued regardless of their job titles or backgrounds. The company's IPO had not only succeeded but exceeded all projections, making Neotech one of the most valuable engineering firms in the industry. Marcus's innovations had revolutionized 3 different sectors, while his mentorship programs had become a model studied by corporations worldwide. His mother's medical bills were long paid, replaced by a trust fund that ensured her comfortable retirement. But Marcus still wore work boots to the office, still listened carefully to what machines were trying to tell him, and still remembered that genius often comes disguised as humility. Have you ever dismissed someone based on their appearance or job title? Share this story if you believe everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth. And here's something only sharp-eyed viewers will notice. Go back to minute 423 and watch Derek's face the exact moment Marcus mentions harmonic resonance. You'll see the precise instant he realizes he might have underestimated the wrong person. Subscribe to Black Voices Speak for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when someone finally gives them the chance to show what they're really capable of.